Well, good morning, English 1 students. What I want to do today is I want to talk about the 12 adventures of Odysseus. There are several different things that are thematically relevant about the 12 adventures of Odysseus. One is how these 12 adventures relate to the central theme of the Odyssey of home and family. But what I want to do today is I want to talk about how the 12 adventures of the Odyssey are actually 12 different case studies into the theme of Xenia, or hospitality. Okay? Hospitality seems like an odd thing to theme an epic around, but in many ways, these 12 adventures that Odysseus goes on are really 12 different tests of Xenia. I want you to walk you through how each of these different adventures are connected to Xenia so you can understand the way that Homer is trying to show the importance of Xenia in the Odyssey. Okay? Now, as we talked about in the last video that I did about Xenia, in many ways, Xenia is the test for Homer for who is pious and who is impious, who is virtuous, who is vicious, who should Odysseus trust and who should he not trust. One of the things I want to show is how you can see that theme going throughout the 12, these 12 different adventures, either tests for Odysseus or tests for the inhabitants, okay? So the first island that Odysseus, of course, goes to is the Kykonus Island, okay? This is the small city that he invades and that he takes over, okay? Now this would be an example of Odysseus, not practicing hospitality, not practicing Xenia. And because, of course, if you're taking over someone's, just raiding someone's city just for the heck of it, that's not very hospitable, okay? Because there isn't really a reason for Odysseus to raid them, right? They've already got a lot of riches and, glory and everything from Troy. And this is a bit superfluous, okay? There's a test here for Odysseus. Is he hospitable or not? Does he practice Xenia? He doesn't really succeed, okay? The second island that we go to is the Lotus Eaters. Now, the Lotus Eaters are interesting because in some ways the Lotus Eaters do seem to be hospitable, right? They call the people to, they call, Odysseus who's been over to them. They say, yeah, we'll give you the lotus. We're being very hospitable. But in some ways, the problem here is, is in one sense, while they're trying to practice hospitality, they're not giving the right things to Odysseus' men, okay? Because the Lotus plant here in the Odyssey is kind of like a drug, right? They take it and the men's senses get altered and they don't want to go home anymore, okay? So are the Lotus Eaters practicing Xenia? Well, kind of, but it's, while they're being hospitable in a sense, when you're giving, the men who come to you drugs, well, that isn't really, true hospitality, okay? So Lotus Eaters are failing the test of hospitality in that regard. All right, after the Lotus Eaters, he goes to the Cyclops, okay? And the Cyclops, Polyphemus, is one of the clear examples of how to break Xenia in my book, okay? Because when you are eating your guests for dinner, you're breaking Xenia, You should be feeding your guests. You shouldn't be eating your guests, okay? Basic test of Xenia. Of course, I think it's also relevant to note that Odysseus and his men also failed the test of Xenia here because what do? Well, they go to Polyphemus' house and begin helping themselves to his cheeses and his stuff without asking, okay? And that's not being a good guess, okay? Polyphemus breaks Xenia worse, but Odysseus and his men, have issues of their own, okay? One of the things we're going to see is that Odysseus has a lot to learn on this journey, and this is part of it. He's not practicing Xenia like he should. After the Cyclops, we go to Aeolus. And Aeolus practices hospitality well, okay? He's one of the rare examples of, one of the good islands that Odysseus is at. He welcomes Odysseus' men, he feeds them, feasts with them for a month, and he gives them a gift as they leave of a bag of winds. If Odysseus' men hadn't stolen it, would have gotten Odysseus back home quite easily, okay? So Aeolus is someone Odysseus can trust. He practices Xenia and hospitality. All right? Our fifth island, the Lastrygonians, is another great example of how to violate hospitality. Another island of people that want to eat their guests instead of feeding their guests. All right, with these giants that kill a lot of Odysseus' men. All right. And our sixth island, Circe's island, is again an interesting island because again we have someone who looks on first glance like they're being hospitable. After all, Circe welcomes the sailors in. She gives them food. But of course, appearances can be deceiving because Circe decides to then turn all of Odysseus' men into beasts, okay? Just like the Lotus Eaters, what initially looks like, hospitality, what originally looks like Xenia, isn't actually so hospitable. All right, moving on to the last 6 adventures of the Odyssey. The 7th adventure is the underworld. And in some ways, the underworld seems to break Xenia. It's not like, the dead are really, can be hospitable to Odysseus. Now, we do, in some ways, have Odysseus kind of acting like a host, though, and sacrificing, these animals, and then inviting the dead to come up to meet him and then to drink of the blood, since apparently all the dead want to drink blood, okay? So you kind of have Odysseus practicing as a good host here, but this is also a bit of a stretch. It's a bit harder to see Xenia in this adventure, okay? The next adventure is more clear with the Sirens, all right? The Sirens are another, group of monsters that are practicing a false hospitality, right? They act like they want to be hospitable. They're welcoming the sailors over to them with their melodious voices, hiding the fact that once, if anyone actually comes to the Sirens, well, what's going to happen? Well, the Sirens are going to eat all of them, and pick their bones apart, okay? The Sirens are an example of those who try to lure people with Xenia, but don't exactly plan to practice Xenia themselves. All right. Now our next island here, is with our 12 tests. Here is Scylla and Charybdis. This is another one that's a bit of a stretch. It's not immediately clear how practiced. But there is a sense in which Xenia is is related here. Because Charybdis is described as this mouth. That's sucking everything into her, and eating everything up, okay? And when you're thinking about eating, you might think about hospitality. And certainly there's a sense in which they're passing through their land, and what are Scylla and Charybdis trying to do instead of showing them hospitality, or they're trying to kill them and eat them, all right? So whether it's snatching them up, with their long heads, or sucking them into the whirlpool, they're both trying to eat instead of to feed. With regards to their guests, all right? But I do acknowledge that one is a bit of a stretch. So other ones are more clear, okay? With regards to the cattle of the sun, here we see an example of Xenia that is not practiced because it is the gods' home, okay? And Xenia works differently when the gods are around, okay? Odysseus and his men are supposed to be good guests, which means don't eat the god's cattle if the god doesn't want you to eat the cattle. But Odysseus's men fail the test. Odysseus passes the test. Odysseus has finally learned his lesson. He needs to practice Xenia. As a result, Odysseus is not going to be killed. But Odysseus's men fail the test. As a result, they're all killed because they don't practice Xenia. Okay. The 11th island that Odysseus goes to is Calypso, and here we also see another violation of Xenia. Calypso originally seems, to practice Xenia very well as she welcomes Odysseus in, feeds him, gives him shelter, offers him immortality, but of course she becomes a bad host when she doesn't let Odysseus leave even when Odysseus wants to leave. Instead, she keeps Odysseus on her island with her for 9 full years, okay? So Calypso does not practice Xenia. The last adventure then that we have is the land of the Phaeacians, all right? This is a 12th island that Odysseus visits. And at the Phaeacian island, the Phaeacians do practice hospitality, just like Aeolus did, and they practice it well. All right, they feed Odysseus, they clothe him, they give him a place to stay, they send him home, they give him gifts, they throw a party. They go the full gamut because the Phaeacians know how to practice Xenia and practice hospitality. Okay, so hopefully what you get out of this is you see why it is that you could call the Odyssey an epic of hospitality or an epic of Xenia. Because in these 12 adventures, Xenia arises as a primary theme of who are those virtuous people who practice Xenia and who are those who don't. Because Homer is trying to remind his audience of something. He's trying to remind them that Xenia is important. Your ability to show hospitality to strangers, Homer believes, is a primary test of character. And Odysseus has to learn how to better practice Xenia. He also has to learn how to better trust people based on do they practice Xenia or do they not practice Xenia. Because for Homer, Xenia is one of the most important virtues that we can display in our lives.